Yaliyotendeka ni kwamba kulikuwa na upotevu wa mambo ya usalama. Ni kwamba watu ambao walikuwa wanatakana kuangalia mambo haya ya usalama walikuwa kama watu ambao walikuwa wanatakana kuangalia mambo haya walikuwa kama county commissioner, kama county commander, walikuwa katika shirika la utengo la county commissioner DCI, walikuwa katika shirika la utengo la ujasusi. Tukiangalia tuko na machifu, na vile vile tukiangalia tuko na machifu, tuko na wazee wa mitaa, wazee wa tuko na nyumba kumi. Kwa hiyo mambo yetu ya usalama ni lazima yazingatiwe zaidi. Kwa hiyo mambo yetu ya usalama ni lazima yazingatiwe zaidi. Mwenyewe ameweza kutamka akisema kwamba hata rais mwenyewe ameweza kutamka akisema kwamba huyu mtu ni terrorist. Basi mimi nasema ya kwamba kama huyu wale kuanzia commissioner, wale ambao wakisema ya kwamba wale kuanzia commissioner ambaye anaketi kama chairman ya Kilifi wa ile committee ya security, commissioner ambaye anaketi kama chairman na komanda wake wa polisi na DCI na kila mtu, akifuatiwa na wale watu wote ambao wako chini wanahusika kila mtu mpaka kwenye vijiji, akifuatiwa na wale watu wote ambao wako chini wanahusika mpaka kwenye vijiji. Ningeomba kumwambia rais hawa watu hawezi kuwafuta kazi, wasiwe katika hizo kazi zao. Manake huwezi kupata kitu kama hichi ambacho kinaua watu na wewe usiweze kuchukua hatua yoyote. Kwa hiyo Bwana Spika, mimi kama seneta wa Kilifi ni jambo la kusikitisha, na mimi niko na wale watu wote ambao wamepoteza wao. Tunaombea Mwenyezi Mungu, lakini jambo kama hili ni lazima lichunguzwe, lifikishwe mwisho, na wale watakaopatikana kwamba walizembea zile kazi zao. Bwana Spika, tunasema ni lazima rais achukue hatua ya kuwafuta kazi. Asante sana.
You second. Honorable members, that pursuant to Standing Order 37, the Senate do now adjourn to discuss a definite matter of urgent national importance, namely the discovery of mass graves thought to be those of Pastor Paul Mackenzie followers who purportedly died of starvation as part of the religious conviction prevailing in Shakahola Village, Kilifi County since Friday, 20th April 2023. And honorable members, I am aware that there are other senators who had placed statements and confirmed, and I will give them priority in this particular order. Senator Gloria Orwoba, Senator Hamida, Senator Veronica Maina, and Senator Mandago. Each 5 minutes. Thereafter, I will embark on the members who have requested to speak to this motion. Those 5 senators had their statements approved by the desk of the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I want to add my voice on this issue, but first, before I even get into my arguments, I want to do some sensitization, Mr. Speaker. There seems to be some confusion about religion and cults. A cult is not a religion. It's a social movement. And what we are witnessing, Mr. Speaker, is a social movement, not a religion. So, Mr. Speaker, as I weigh in on this, I want to actually urge my fellow senators in the floor of the House to understand that we are actually discussing a matter of a social movement whereby we have a person who has convinced other people to starve themselves and their families to death, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have an issue.
What's your point
and
of
the
order,
issue,
Senator
and I hope my time will be given back to me.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Gloria is misleading this House because it is in the public domain that, in fact, this gentleman was running a church called Good News International. If you feel constrained to speak freely on this issue, you don't have to contribute. But what you cannot do, Mr. Speaker, is to try and mischaracterize what we are facing. These people, we know what social movements are. We know what the social movement is, like what she was trying with sensitization on period shaming. That's a social movement. It's not a cult. Are you saying your movement is a cult? It's not a cult, Mr. Speaker. It is in public domain that, in fact, this gentleman was running a church. It is based on certain faith and beliefs that are founded in religion. In fact, Mr. Speaker, so if you feel that because of your own political
Senator
constraints...
Sifuna, you have made your point.
Oh, let me finish. Let me finish. And you will not shout at me. Let me finish. I'm on a point of order.
Order, Gloria.
Yeah, I am. I am on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, if you feel constrained by your political chains that you can't put them down and speak to an issue objectively, you don't have to contribute, but you don't have to mislead us here.
Senator Gloria, resume and proceed to prosecute your issue.
Mr. Speaker, I'm standing here as Senator Gloria Oroba, giving my views as Senator Gloria Oroba. I do not see any chains around me, Mr. Speaker, and let it be known to the public that what I speak here represents on my beliefs and my opinions. I do not speak for anybody. So, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, a cult is a social movement. And that is what it is. A cult is a social movement. And we have so many people who are opening up all sorts of establishments in the guises of religious institutions, not only churches, but also all sorts of things, including mosques and what they plan to, they call religious schools and things like that. We all know, particularly some of us who are Christians, we know, Mr. Speaker, is that there is no legal definition of a cult. Because, Mr. Speaker, if we had a legal definition of a cult, Mr. Speaker, then this would have been a very clear case of this is a cult, this is what it entails, and this is how we have to, deal with this matter, Mr. Speaker. We had the pronouncement of our leader saying that this is a terrorist. I agree, Mr. Speaker. This is not a pastor. This is a terrorist. A terrorist who has actually gone out of their way to influence people to kill themselves, just as we have suicide bombers, Mr. Speaker. So when we are weighing in on this matter, I wanted to sensitize people. Every right also, you cannot stand up and say you have the freedom of belief and religion, yet actually what you're hiding behind is acts of terrorism, Mr. Speaker. And so therefore, when we are looking at this case, and for me, Mr. Speaker, I actually push that we have a commission of inquiry, because this is an act of terrorism. This is a situation where we have actually had a terrorist sitting in a county somewhere, recruiting people into terrorist activities, and therefore it must be dealt with as an act of terrorism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it also states in our Constitution that the state shall take legislative policy and other measures, including setting standards to ensure that all rights are protected, Mr. Speaker. And so, on this particular matter, what the state should do and continue to do is ensure that the right to life is protected, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Gloria, your time is up. Wind up. Resume your seat, Senator. Resume your seat, Senator Gloria. Senator Hamida, you've got your 5 minutes running now.
She was doing definitions. Asante Bwana Spika.
Order, Senator Gloria.
Asante Bwana Spika. Ya kwangu tu ni kukemea na kuna masikitiko makubwa sana kwa watu wa Kilifi na wa Kenya kwa jumla, kuwa ni watu wengi sana tunaona walikwenda na ni miaka mingi imechukua. Bwana Spika, hii ni kuanzia mwaka 2017. Na naambiwa hapa ni 203, kuwa haya yote yalikuwa yakitendeka nchi yetu tukiwa sote tuko hapa. Nchi ilikuwa iko kwenye county, iko na governor na wenye nitasema kwenye county wenyewe hatukuweza kujua kuwa watu wetu, familia yetu, ndugu zetu walikuwa wakienda kwenye huo msitu. Huo msitu umekula watu wengi, Bwana Mwenyekiti. Ningeomba sana kuwa uchunguzi ufanywe kwa haraka, na mtu mwenyewe yeye Pastor Mackenzie nafikiria kwa sasa yuko, na tumeona kuwa Pastor Mackenzie alikuwa ameshikwa kabla na alitolewa tu fine ya 10,000 peke yake, na kusema kweli mpaka na yale yote alikuwa amefanya, lakini fine ilikuwa ni 10,000. Kwa hivyo tunaomba kuwa hiyo iweze kuchunguzwa kwa haraka na tuweze kuona matokeo ya watu. Lakini Bwana Mwenye Spika, nashindwa kuwa hao watu wote wamefariki na watu na familia zao watu wameumia. Kwa hivyo sijui ni compensation gani tunaweza kufanya kwa hao watu kuweza kuangaliwa. Na la pili, Bwana Spika, ni kuwa tutaweza kumonitor vipi, kwa sababu hii kama wanaita cult, kusema kweli siwezi kujua kwa Kiswahili, haiko kwa mtu mmoja tu, sio kwa Pastor Mackenzie, imekwenda mahali pengi. Pastor Mackenzie pia ameonekana pia ni mtu anajulikaniwa kwa sababu ameonekaniwa na rais wa Kenya wakiwa wakiomba pamoja, na ni masikitiko makubwa. Nataka kujua ni kweli ama si kweli. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, kwa mtu mwenyewe, kwa Pastor Mackenzie, kwa Pastor Mackenzie, kwa yeye kujulikaniwa ni kuwa
Senator Boni, what's your point of order? Resume your seat, Senator Hamida.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Gloria.
105.
I have granted Senator Boni to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again on Standing Order number 105. But this is bigger than 105. The senator is not only contravening Standing Order number 105, but is also attempting to drag the name of the head of state into a national calamity. Mr. Speaker, something that borders on terrorism / apocalypse. Mr. Speaker, if the intention of the young, if the intention of the new senator is to discuss the president, these standing orders allow you. These standing orders, my sister, I'm helping you. These standing orders allow you to discuss the president. You can bring a substantive motion. But to disparage the name of the head of state, even if he is your opponent, even if he is not your presidential candidate, who was not your presidential candidate of choice, that is not the route to go. Imagine yourself, if it was your husband being named to be associated with Mackenzie. Where would that leave
Order
you?
members,
Mr. Speaker,
order members. Order members.
Mr. Speaker,
order members.
Mr. Speaker,
go on,
I therefore,
Senator
Mr. Speaker, request that the senator be forced to withdraw and apologize. And Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of national unity, we can still debate the demerits of the head of state with decorum.
Allow him.
We are killing, Mr. Speaker, we are killing our own Senate, the same one that you keep on lying and saying that it is the upper house.
You've made your point. You've made your point, Senator Boni.
Mr. Speaker,
you've made your
Mr.
point.
Speaker, again I want to help the young senator
Boni, you have
from
made your
Nairobi.
Point. You've made your point.
Mr. Speaker,
resume your seat.
This is important.
Resume
I
your
also,
seat. I have. Resume your seat. Senator Hamida. Senator Hamida, I want to invite you to the provisions of that Standing Order 05 so that you either substantiate and or apologize for that statement.
Bwana Speaker, Bwana Spika, mimi hata wakunipa nafasi ya kusema vile nilikuwa nataka kusema. Mimi ile nilikuwa nasema kuwa Bwana Mackenzie ameonekaniwa tu akiwa wala hata sikusema zaidi hapo. Nimesema ameonekaniwa wakiomba pamoja. Hiyo tu ndio nimesema. Sijasema kitu. Kwa hivyo Bwana Mwenyekiti, ningeshtumu mimi nimesema tu wamekuwa kanisani pamoja. Hiyo tu ndio nimesema, na kama peke yake nimesema, na kuna ubaya ya wao kuwa kanisani pamoja. Yeye ni pastor.
Order members.
Bwana Spika, yeye kabla watu hawajajua ni kazi gani anafanya, yeye already alikuwa ni pastor na alikuwa anaombea watu. Kwa hivyo ameonekaniwa na watu wengi kanisani. Bwana Spika, naomba uweze tafadhali nimalize, na naomba niongezewe dakika moja. Bwana Mwenyekiti, Bwana Spika, kwa hivyo naomba kuwe na uchunguzi wa haraka. Bwana Mwenye Spika, naomba wakubwa wa makanisa na
Senator Hamida, your time is up. Senator Veronica. Resume your seat, Senator Hamida.
Mr. Speaker, sir, would you protect me, Mr. Speaker,
Order members,
sir?
Order members. Senator Veronica, proceed.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to debate this motion, which brings a very sad day to the nation of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, to watch such a horrendous action, Mr. Speaker, from one Mackenzie, Mr. Speaker, who I would never dignify with the title called pastor, Mr. Speaker. We need to come to a very simple conclusion, Mr. Speaker, that Mackenzie operated and acted on his own motion, Mr. Speaker, not guided by any form of religion, Mr. Speaker, but driven by evil scheme, occultism, Mr. Speaker, cultic behavior, Mr. Speaker, that lured very innocent victims who are gullible to his den, Mr. Speaker, where he persuaded them to fast until their death, Mr. Speaker. What has shocked me, Mr. Speaker, in such a serious motion, Mr. Speaker, where we are not even supposed to even define or even see indications of where any senator, which political side of divide any senator belongs to, Mr. Speaker, I have watched the same today, this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, being politicized to the point where my honorable colleague, Senator Hamida, has mentioned the name of the head of state. Mr. Speaker, let me say this, Mr. Speaker, before I even proceed. It is the saddest moment, Mr. Speaker, that we would want to trivial an event that amounts to a massacre, Mr. Speaker, to a point of even saying that they have been in charge with anybody, as though that proves anything, without any substantiation. You will keep quiet. I finish what I am submitting before this House, and you will respect my time. Respect my time, please. You will keep quiet until I finish.
Order members.
Mr. Speaker,
allow the senator to be heard in silence.
Let me say this, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
The Honourable Senator,
Order members, Senator Eddie,
the Honourable Senator did not offer any evidence before the floor of this House to prove that he had been in charge with anybody. And let me be very clear, Mr. Speaker, not that it would have made any difference if he went to any church with anybody, including with Senator Sifuna or Senator Hamida. The point is, it would not have reduced the magnitude of the massacre that has happened in Kilifi, Mr. Speaker. And I hope when, Mr. Speaker, we retreat from today's debate, Senator Madzayo, who is deeply affected, this being a massacre that has happened in his county, will sit down his political side of the divide, Mr. Speaker, and talk to them about taking issues more seriously, especially when they are touching on lives and loss of lives of many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the tragic incidents, Mr. Speaker, has caused loss of life, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
It is
Allow
shocking,
Senator
Mr.
Veronica
Speaker, that as a society, Mr. Speaker, there was no detection and lives were lost, Mr. Speaker. I have asked myself many questions, Mr. Speaker. Was there no community, Mr. Speaker, around Shakahola village in Kilifi County? Was there no chief? Was there no security intelligence to detect? Mr. Speaker, how does one person die, the 6th person, the 10th person, the 80th person, Mr. Speaker? Is this the kind of society that we have nurtured for our generations and for ourselves, Mr. Speaker? I want to say this, Mr. Speaker. Criminal activity is criminal activity. Mackenzie, Mr. Speaker, has entered into a different realm that cannot be called religion, Mr. Speaker. He has traversed, Mr. Speaker, into egregious violations of human rights, Mr. Speaker. If his case has to be handled, Mr. Speaker, then it has to be handled with the seriousness that it deserves, Mr. Speaker, and we sympathize with the hearts and the hearts and the families of all the victims, Mr. Speaker, who have lost their lives in Kilifi. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, the church, which has been conducting its affairs within its spiritual mandate and legal mandate, Mr. Speaker, must not now be put to defense on account of Mackenzie's evil schemes and criminal activity, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
I wish to be informed.
Senator Veronica, resume your seat, Senator Veronica. Senator Veronica, take your seat. Honorable members, this is a very serious motion that we are discussing. Let us be sober for one moment. This is a serious motion. Senator Mandago. I had indicated there were 5 senators who had submitted statements and had been approved. Senator Mandago is among the 5 and is the last one in that list. I will thereafter follow the system of those who requested to speak to it.
And my 5 minutes starts now. Mr. Speaker, first I rise in support of this motion on the matter, this critical matter in Kilifi County. Mr. Speaker, it is quite unfortunate that such activity of such magnitude that has resulted in deaths. As we speak today, the count is at 73, and we don't know how many more will be 89, Mr. Speaker. The most astonishing thing, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that in this country, more than 89 people can die, be buried, without any alarm from any quarter of the security, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm also wondering, the families of those who are affected, whether they also reported the same matter of disappearance of their kins, Mr. Speaker, to any security agents. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter. And, Mr. Speaker, this House, and it is time as Parliament, as Senate, Mr. Speaker, we come up with legislation to prohibit cults and even regulate religious activities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you remember in the past, we had another church called Finger of God. And you know what happened to one of our beautiful, bright news anchor who was duped into that? Her career was destroyed. Our family was destroyed. They even lost a child, Mr. Speaker. And if we continue shying away from doing what we are supposed to do as legislators, that we cannot regulate religion, Mr. Speaker, it is time. If we can lose up to 89 people, and there are more investigations going on, and we are not aware of how many other cultic activities are happening around the country, Mr. Speaker, there is need for legislation to prohibit. Mr. Speaker, a country like Rwanda,
passed the legislation to require anybody starting a church must have some qualification in theology, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we cannot have people waking up today, he's an apostle, before you discover he's a reverend, before long he's a bishop, he's archbishop, and shortly you discover he has become the Jesus of Tongaren, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, if we continue allowing this, it is going to form a precedent. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to say, where was the NIS? Where was the County Security Committee team? And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the period, most of the people who are buried, Mr. Speaker, it was after the Jubilee administration governed by the handshake, and I think the NIS and the security were busy gerrymandering with politics, and they forgot a very important function of making sure citizens of this country are safe, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is not proper that our agencies, who are galloping a lot of resources in this country, that such act can happen without them noticing or even reporting. Unless, Mr. Speaker, the County Security Committee in Kilifi was part and parcel of this process, I request, Mr. Speaker, that the County Security Committee must be investigated, Mr. Speaker, for sleeping on the job, and proper action must be taken. And Senator, the Honorable Senator for Kilifi, I must say I'm also surprised that our whole 89 people can die in your county and you are not aware, and even the county government is not aware. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to support the motion.
Thank you, Senator Mandago. Honorable Senator Manzo Daniel Kitonga.
Mr. Speaker, not everybody who says, Lord, Lord, shall make to the kingdom of heaven. And only those who do what God commands has that chance. And it is very clear the biggest commandment is to love others as you love yourself, to love God and to love others as you love yourself. And again, in the last days, there will be many false prophets. And these false prophets shall be known by their product. The product of Pastor and Prophet Mackenzie is now known that it is death. Mr. Speaker, the activities which has taken place in Kilifi, a lot of them are of criminal nature and have to be investigated thoroughly. In fact, I really want to agree with Honorable Madago that the NSIS should have picked this many years ago, relay that information to the security agencies, and those activities whereby many people have been found dead would have been stopped a long time ago. Mr. Speaker, I want to state that these activities can affect any one of us here, our relatives, our children, and if it is allowed to go on either in this church or in any other church in any part of the country or in any part of the world, I'm sure it offends even international law. And for that matter, Mr. Speaker, this particular incident must be investigated very closely. Mr. Speaker, it is not the only church which has such activities. And in fact, we have to go back to the old debate, and using that measure I have given, which was given by Jesus Christ himself, then it shall be determined by the products or by the outcome of the activities of such preachers, Mr. Speaker. The biggest commandment is the commandment of love. At the moment one doesn't measure to that, then obviously, Mr. Speaker, the agencies in this country must take action. What has happened, Mr. Speaker, we demand information as to the outcome of postmortems which will be conducted in these bodies. Has somebody's skull been crushed? Has somebody just starved to death? Or has any other method been used to kill or to commit atrocity against these particular people? Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of information which has come out from the people who know this pastor, from the people who live in Kilifi, that in fact a lot of cash movement was there. People will sell whatever they have so that they could follow this movement, and also so that they could reach everlasting life, which everybody aspires to. And in the process, some of them will starve themselves to death, and others, when they attempt to escape, Mr. Speaker, from the information I have, will then be revisited upon. Mr. Speaker, the person who released this information went through this forest, this massive land, to another corner and found themselves into a place they could give information and investigations could begin. I want also to inform the House that the information I have is that Pastor Mackenzie surrendered himself to police when he heard there were issues. And that's why Senator Amida, as a lawyer, will tell you, the police are allowed by the law to release anybody on, so long as they can be traced on bond, even police bond. And this person was released on bond. I'm told during the investigations, he's also making demands to police. He claims that he must be left alone at the back of the police car, the Land Cruiser. And sure enough, he's been complying and allowing investigations to take place. But, Mr. Speaker, we have a lesson to learn here, even as politicians. We should not trust everybody who even invites us to our rambies or for prayers, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately, this pastor has been, together with other pastors, visiting the head of state during the campaign and even purporting to pray for him. Yet behind the scenes, he's committing atrocities, he's misleading Kenyans, and therefore anybody is gullible to such people. Now that it is claimed that religion is the opium of the people. We have to be careful with the religion. We have only to test every religion, Mr. Speaker, with the test we were given by Jesus Christ to see them by their outcome and whether whatever they do results into breaking the law of God. With the biggest law is law of love, and the other one is to follow the commandments of God. Whoever follows the commandments of God will not commit murder, which is one of the commandments. I raise my case, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Senator Cherargei Samson Kiprotich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my heart and empathies and sympathies goes to the families and friends who have lost more than 89 Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, this looks like a movie of genocide in the famous Hotel Rwanda, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's very sad that religion, as Karl Marx has said, is the opium of the masses and the poor, as my brother has alluded to. It's very sad, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I propose the following to the government, that, Mr. Speaker, the issue of mental illness is a very serious issue. Depression, and you even saw the case of Kitengela that is trending and what happened in Kitengela, Mr. Speaker. So we did debate the mental health bill last session, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, these families and many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, are going through mental issues, Mr. Speaker, that should be looked at. So, Speaker, I propose that government should immediately, through the Ministry of Interior and Coordination, and also Attorney General's office, to vet afresh, Mr. Speaker, and look at the registration of religious organizations in the country, be it Christian, Hinduism, Muslim, Mr. Speaker. I think there is a misnomer in this country, Mr. Speaker, where we are only keen against the Muslim community because there is a perception that there is radicalization, Mr. Speaker. Though, Mr. Speaker, these are shown that we should look at both ways. Even within Christianity, there is radicalization that is going through, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, vetting and registration of religious organizations must be done, Mr. Speaker. We are aware that the right to religion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, everybody has a right to worship, but the Constitution provides that where your right starts is where my right ends, Mr. Speaker. Even as we go through investigation, we want to ask all of us to refrain from commenting, Mr. Speaker, because it's sometimes prejudicial. I have seen the DPP, DCI minister going there, Mr. Speaker, but we need to be given forensic information, Mr. Speaker, on post-mortem, that really what happens, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this issue of cult religion is very sad, Mr. Speaker. I've heard my friends alluding that in one or so, on several or some occasions, that the pastor, the infamous Pastor Mackenzie, was in the same congregation with the president, Mr. Speaker. Those are just illusions. Those are just statements, Mr. Speaker, that has been made for political expediency, Mr. Speaker. We are aware, and I want to urge minority side, Mr. Speaker, not to trivialize some of this matter, not to do it for political capital or expediency that we are seeing today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the President of the Republic of Kenya is a truthful man. He's an honest man. He's a man of God, Mr. Speaker, and he will ensure that anybody, Mr. Speaker, who might have been participant and even the government, Mr. Speaker, that might have been a participant in one way or another in aiding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, finally, so that my colleagues are, I think as leaders, and I'm surprised that the minority leader is the Senator of Kilifi, Mr. Speaker. I know a number of MPs, members of parliament. These things were happening behind, and they were busy doing demonstrations, Mr. Speaker. It's very sad that as a leader, you can allow, Mr. Speaker, side things to be happening behind your back, Mr. Speaker. Where was the senator of Kilifi, Mr. Speaker? Where was the women rep, Mr. Speaker? Where were the leaders from Coast Region, including Senator Faki, Mr. Speaker? And therefore, and Mr. Speaker, I have seen these people alluding that the deaths that happened from 2017, it was in the previous government, Mr. Speaker. It is this government as an unadded these grievous things that are happening, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge that religion, I had seen Mama Ida Odinga made a comment about this. I think she might be right to some extent when she said this in January 2022, that we need to relook at the registration, vetting the process of religious organizations in the country, Mr. Speaker. That is the position of the government, that we need to relook, Mr. Speaker, so that we can protect our people, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to call upon Kenya Film Classification Board to be on the lookout to flag content, Mr. Speaker, that will always, the content, Mr. Speaker, because these people are preaching in our televisions, Mr. Speaker. I saw one saying, can you wave your phone? And by the end of this week, Mr. Speaker, we'll get 300,000. Mr. Speaker, it's very unfair. We must be told this flag, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I see some of the people calling, and Mr. Speaker, I don't know, we need to have this conversation. Most of the Carnival congregation are women, Mr. Speaker. I think as we empower the girl child, we must talk to our women, because these people are exploiting women, Mr. Speaker. Some of them are telling them, if I touch you, and I want to mention, said, when a woman goes and they have breast cancer, they might touch where the disease is, Mr. Those are sexual violences, Mr. Speaker. And people are finding it convenient watching in television and cheering, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a situation, even there was one who told them, sold everything and bring it, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I condemn it and support this motion. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, my screen is reflecting every member is desirous of speaking to this issue. I want to propose that instead of 5 minutes, we do those of us who will get time to speak 3 minutes, so that we accommodate as many as... Very well. Thank you. That is okay. We are not going to debate. I will allow those who will be reached to speak to it. Senator Wambua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the record, I stand in support of this motion. Senator Cherargei and my chairman, if you can just listen to this may be important. Mr. Speaker, John the Evangelist, when he was aging, he retreated to Asia Minor. And from there, he wrote the Gospel of 1 John. In chapter 4, between verse 1 and 6, he says that we should test all the spirits, because there are some spirits that will come in the name of God, but they are evil spirits. The Speaker, that statement is as true today as it was then. Jesus Christ himself, before ascending to heaven, before the betrayal, he said the following words about his death and the betrayer. He says that the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to the man by whom the Son of God is betrayed. It would have been better if that man had not been born. Mr. Speaker, I thought we agreed we'd do 5 minutes. No, we agreed 5 minutes. No, we agreed 5 minutes.
Proceed. You've got 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes, yes.
Five.
I have 5 minutes. So, Mr. Speaker, religion is meant to give hope and speak life to hopelessness and despair. The Speaker, in particular Christianity,
is a religion founded on the foundations of education and healthcare. It is alarming, Mr. Speaker, that the false and fake pastor, Paul Mackenzie, is telling our children that they should not go to school, and when they get sick, they should not seek medical attention. So, Speaker, the first missionaries who came to this country, beginning with those who arrived in Rabai at the coast, then Offman, who led his team in Kitui South at a place called Ikuda and established a church there in 1891. Then Peter Cameron Scott, who led his team to Machakos and established today the biggest Christian training college, Scott Theological College. They believed in the value of education and healthcare. The Speaker, how is it that today we have religious leaders who are telling people, their followers, that they should not go to school, they should not seek medical attention? This is what I was going to say, Mr. Speaker. Let senators debate this matter soberly. Why? 2 reasons. Today, we are told we have only 89 people that have been already found. That number could grow to a bigger number than we know. It's possible that we have people from all our counties who have suffered this fate. The Speaker, we lived in this country when we had imposters called Mamlukis who found themselves to the sanctum of power. They conned their way into the presidency. It is not to say that Kibaki was compliant, that he allowed them to come near him. No, Mr. Speaker. We have an imposter police officer who went into the stations and was even transferring and firing officers. It's not to say that the Inspector General of Police had conspired with him. The Speaker, let people just debate this matter. And what I think, the Speaker, lastly, this man could actually be harvesting body parts from the people that are dying. Let us sober up as we get to the bottom of this matter.
Senator Alexander Munigi Munyi.
Bwana Spika, naunga mkono hii mambo iangaliwe vizuri. Hii mambo iko hapa, sisi senator tunaona kama ni mambo ya kupigania kelele tu, kwa sababu kuna mambo ya kisiasa na mambo ya kucheza na afya za watu. Sio mambo ya Azimio, sio mambo ya Kenya Kwanza. Nataka tukae pamoja kama senator tuweze kuonyesha nchi ya Kenya tunafanya kazi ya aina gani. Kwa sababu tunamulika mambo ya Kilifi, hatunjamulika Embu, hatunjamulika kona zote katika Kenya mzima, tuko na majimbo 47. Serikali, Bwana Spika, serikali ya Yesu Kristo wakati ilikuwako ile tunafuata, ilikuwa na daktari, ilikuwa na walimu, ilikuwa na wapishi, ilikuwa na watu wa kokota pesa na kila kitu yote ilikuwa pale. Lakini wakati tumekuja kufanya mambo ifanye upelelezi, tumeanza kujipiana maneno, wewe, lakini nataka niseme tunaangalia Kilifi, lakini kuna Kilifi nyingi katika Kenya. Bwana Spika, naomba kama ni mambo ya kufanya investigation kwa hii maneno, tuanze kama kulikuwa sub area, kulikuwa na MCA, kulikuwa na senator karibu miaka 10, rafiki wangu ya Kilifi. Kuna jimbo zile siko karibu ambaye jimbo ya Mombasa, hata ya Ramu. Tuangalie au watu walikuwa wanafanya kazi gani. Kwa sababu
Senator Mundigi, just hold. Honorable members, pursuant to Standing Order 34-2A, we are extending the interruption of the sitting for the next 15 minutes only.
Kwa sababu tunaanza kupigana hapa kama ni mambo ya Azimio, mambo ya Kenya Kwanza, mambo ya kurusha mawe, mambo ya si ya kurusha mawe. Tunataka tuwe sahihi, tuweze kuonyesha dunia mzima Senate inaendelea namna gani, kwa sababu ni mambo ya satanic na mambo ya kimungu ambayo yaavya watu. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, naomba mambo ifanywe upelelezi kutoka kwa kila viongozi wote. Rafiki wangu ya Kilifi alikuwa hapa akiwa amechaguliwa miaka 10. Tujue alikuwa anafanya kazi gani. Mimi nataka niseme, mimi nimechaguliwa miezi 6 as a senator of Embu County. Na kila siku asubuhi na jioni mpaka nijue kona sote ya Embu inafanya namna gani. Lakini senator wa Kilifi anakuja kutuambia mambo zingine, atujue atuambia nini, anafaa atuambie miaka 10 alikuwa afanya nini. Kwa hivyo tukianja kufanya upelelezi, tufanye upelelezi wa senator wa Kilifi, atuambie ilikuwa inafanyika namna gani, kwa sababu tunajua juzi tu ilifanyika, tukasikia watu wameenda kurusha mawe, alikuwa kwanza kwenda kurusha mawe. Kutuambia mambo watu wanakufa namna gani kule. Kwa hivyo ni asante, naunga mkono. Asante Bwana Spika.
Senator Ledava.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request you to protect me from my dear friend. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very sad affair that we need to debate it with a lot of sobriety. Mr. Speaker, when I listen to that someone who is purportedly a pastor, what I could see is the true definition of mental illness. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the majority whip would attest to the fact that when what this pastor was exhibiting was tendency of someone suffering from schizophrenic. What we ought to do, Mr. Speaker, is to ask ourselves some very, very tough questions as what is happening to our young population. What is luring people to such deadly cults? The only thing that I can conclude is one, poverty, lack of awareness, and the desire to be recognized by someone who you perceive to be superior. Mr. Speaker, if you go to our rural parts, you will be shocked by the number of people who follow certain characters because of the hope for tomorrow. Our population is poor. The gap between the rich and poor in this country is quite wide. What we need to be doing here is to try and create awareness to our people. You know, people suffer. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, mental illness is something that really confuses populations. When I saw a young, educated girl who was traveling the world, who had been enlightened, or rather, who understand every aspect of this world, selling all her properties and coming back to follow that pastor, I asked myself, what could have gone wrong? Maybe she was having her personal problems. Maybe the only shoulder she had that she could lean on was that pastor. So I think this is an opportunity for us to seriously investigate this matter. Is it that this is a criminal enterprise? I don't want to name names, Mr. Speaker, but sometimes I wonder, if you go to Kajiado County, you'll find that there is a preacher who has bought about 500 acres of land. This character had 860 acres of land. It was his own private property. He could do whatever he wanted in that land, and no one could question. So, Mr. Speaker, this is an opportunity for us to be very sober. Number one, try to educate our people so that our people can stop being such gullible. You know, that's a fact. We are very gullible. We are people who, when you're told tomorrow you'll become rich, you go there and you become rich. This is not only happening in Kilifi, Mr. Speaker. In fact, if our national intelligence services do not now get deep into our societies, we'll be hearing another massacre somewhere else. Mr. Speaker, we see people traveling to Kilifi County, and that is a question that I keep on asking myself. You'll find people leaving Kisumu, leaving Kakamega in buses, leaving maybe part of Kisii, part of Narok in buses, going to another big church in Kilifi. Because maybe that's the only place they can get hope. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious thing that requires us to be sober, to investigate whether this character, I cannot even call him a pastor, because the word pastor now loses its meaning, was selling human organs. Maybe he was harvesting human organs. He's a very rich man. To be able to afford 800 acres of land in Kilifi, we need to investigate that. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this statement, and I hope that this is a matter that the National Intelligence Services, the DCI, can investigate further to be able to find a way to stop our population from being lured into deadly traps. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Esther Kinyuri Enyeni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was really waiting for this opportunity after coming to the House late, after the bipartisan talks that we were having. First, I want to say the Shakahola revelations are so tragic. And this massacre can only be compared to the Garissa University attacks where terrorists killed 147 young people. We cannot use such instances. Let's say the terrorists killed young people, and now use that to say all Muslims are bad people. That's the same thing I'm looking in this instance, whereby we cannot use the actions of Mackenzie, who is hiding behind the church to perpetuate criminal activities, to castigate the church generally. We've seen several contributions by different religious organizations who have been very supportive in the society level. So there are positive attributes. What we must do is dig deeper so that we know some of these criminals who are hiding under religion, their own false and individual agendas. If I quote the Bible in Matthew 7, verse 15, as they are wolves. You know, it's very difficult to regulate issues of beliefs. What actually disturbs me, where was the society when this was happening? It's actually something that needs us to think deeply. The society for this case, when your friends disappear and several years down the line, you can only come out now to give narrations. Where were we? Where was the County Security Committee when this was happening? Where were the Nyumba Kumi initiatives that we have at the lowest level, the areas where we are coming from? And I'm very upset because we have very many young people who actually comprise the statistics we are reading on the papers in this country on this Shakahola massacre. So I want to say that it's an opportune time for the Senate to actually request for an inquiry, but also as leaders we need to take personal responsibility to be our own brothers' keepers. Also in relation to do with failure by the local authorities to point out this on time. Was this a business that people are actually benefiting from? There are so many other issues that we need to interrogate so that we do not have the loss of lives that we have actually seen just because people have been brainwashed to believe a certain thing and they end up losing their property and eventually their lives. So as a young person this afternoon, I'm very, very saddened by these actions. And I really wonder if young people who are struggling to look for identity, some of them are even going to these places of worship to get connection with God, but later are also brainwashed to believe things that have costed their lives. It's really sad. So I do not want us to look at Mackenzie's issue to criminalize what the church and religious institutions are doing, but we should dig deeper and expose criminals who are hiding behind the cover of religion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Osotsi Godfrey Otieno. Atieno, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support this motion, and to say that, Mr. Speaker, I represent the county which has the highest concentration of churches and several headquarters of prominent churches are based in Vihiga County. And I'm very sad that some of the victims of this massacre from my county, and that is very sad, especially considering that we are a county that believes in real Christianity, not fake Christianity that this church is practicing. Mr. Speaker, this Shakahola massacre almost reminds me about Boko Haram. And that's why I want to agree with those who say this is terrorism. You know, Boko Haram started like this. They believed that education was harmful, and they went on like that, and they started believing that purification was more important. They wanted to practice Sunni Islam as opposed to Shia Islam. And Mr. Speaker, Boko Haram has grown to cover several countries in Western Africa, Chad, Niger, Mali, and etc. And therefore, it saddens me that this crime has been going on for years without the knowledge of the state. In fact, the biggest terrorist in this matter is not this individual called Mackenzie. It is the state. Where was the state? Where was the NIS? Where was the police? Where was the county commissioner? I think, Mr. Speaker, as a Senate, let this not just be a motion of adjournment. I think the relevant committee has to visit the place and even do an inquiry that this House can look at. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I think the causes and contributors of this religious crime must also be analyzed and understood. Mr. Speaker, I can see my good friend Eddie Okech wants to contribute. So I will not go into a lot of details, but only to say that let us restrict ourselves to the teachings of the Bible. The things we see in the media are not good. In fact, we have our colleagues on the other side every weekend, Sunday, they go to church and they say they are talking about God, but they end up talking about one man called Raila Amolo Odinga and not Jesus and not God. Shame on you. I support.
Senator Karungu Thangwa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to support this motion. From the onset, I'm not worried when I hear the said man was seen in church praising and worshiping with people who are known in this country, because criminals also go to church. Even Waganga, they go to church. Mr. Speaker, radicalization and cultism is as a result of effective propaganda and recruitment techniques, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need to ask ourselves why or what are the factors that lead people to these cults or this radicalization, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we do have religious cults, we do have tribal cults, we even have political cults, Mr. Speaker. And I urge the government, when it is investigating this, it must cast its net wider so that we get to know and understand where else this kind of atrocity is.
Senator Karungu. Honorable Senators, it is now 6:45 p.m., time to adjourn the Senate. The Senate therefore stands adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, 26th of April, 2023 at 9:30 a.m.